increasing number of cases involving illegal migrants in Poland. Last Friday evening, a group of 10 Somalis disturbed the peace of Szczecin residents. Ultimately, the migrants were released. Unfortunately, this is not an isolated case. These are the effects of the Migration Pact, which, according to Polish Prime Minister Tusk, Poland was supposed to benefit from. Friday evening on Mickiewicz Street in Szczecin, a group of 10 migrants was behaving in a loud and suspicious manner. Concerned residents reported the incident to the police and local politicians. There is a group of men here who have clearly come from Africa. There are police officers checking their IDs. These people have some papers from who knows where. They can't even speak any English. Excuse me, do you speak English? Do you speak English? What are you doing here? Ah, you are from Somalia. There is a group of men here who have clearly come from Africa. There are police officers checking their IDs. These people have some papers from who knows where. They can't even speak any English. Excuse me, do you speak English? Do you speak English? What are you doing here? Ah, you are from Somalia. How did these men end up in Szczecin? That is not known for certain. However, there are many indications that they came to us from Germany, like many illegal migrants in the past. Let us remember that people from Somalia cannot be deported to Somalia because at the moment there are such regulations. Who are these people? Are they a threat to society? Thank you, Mr. Donald. The migrants ended up in a convent run by the Calcutta sisters, but they did not stay there long. I called the sisters with an offer of help, asking if they needed any assistance. It turned out that the sisters said they didn't need any help because the migrants were no longer there. And as our journalists found out, the Somalis returned to the streets of Szczecin as if nothing had happened. We don't know who these people are. We don't know if they are criminals. Somalia is one of the most dangerous countries in the world. It has one of the highest crime rates, so they could be bandits. Unfortunately, there are many more similar cases, especially in towns located in the interior of the country. On our air, Garwolin County Administrator Iwona Kurowska reported that the border guard brought unverified migrants to intervention centers in her county. Of course, there are appropriate institutions that should deal with such people, but our facility, like many other facilities, an intervention facility, cannot refuse. The law is on the side of the border guard, which simply brings them in. So they knock on the door and say, "Good morning, we have a gentleman here for you." Yes, that's exactly how it looks. A similar situation occurred in Skierniewice. Illegal migrants were brought to the local orphanage, where after a superficial examination, they were deemed to be minors. There are 3 immigrants here, 2 from Guinea and 1 from Iran. One of them had some documents. I don't know exactly what kind, but the other 2 were illegal immigrants, transported from a guarded center. For now, these are individuals who are being sent to centers or orphanages. The crisis began in Germany in the same way. Then, there were more and more migrants until they began to be housed in social housing or hotels. Then centers were established exclusively for migrants. Today there are so many migrants that Germany is unable to control the situation. This is a scenario that with the government's inaction may also repeat itself in Poland. Germany is sending illegal migrants to Poland that it cannot cope with. They invoked the Dublin agreements, claiming that they all came to Germany from Poland. A special center was even set up in Eisenhüttenstadt, right on the border with Poland. In this way, through the back door, a migration pact was introduced in Poland, which was so highly praised by Prime Minister Tusk. Poland will be a beneficiary of the migration pact. These benefits are clearly visible. That is why citizens are taking matters into their own hands, as exemplified by the border defense movement. We want to control almost all major crossings 24 hours a day. In view of the complete capitulation of the Polish services, we will simply document everything and immediately inform the police or border guards that groups are appearing or that they are being pushed back from the German side. Prime Minister Donald Tusk kept telling Poles that we wouldn't have to take in any illegal.
So in 2002, the OAU was officially replaced by the African Union. The AU was created to be more modern, active, and people centered organization focusing not just on unity but also on peace and security, human rights, good governance, economic development. So, what is the OAU Refugee Convention? So, the 1969 OAU Convention governing the specific aspect of refugee problems in Africa is a treaty that builds on the 1951 UN Refugee Convention, then expands the definition of refugee. They expands the definition of refugee to include people who are fleeing from wars, external aggression, occupation, or massive human rights violation. It was created because African leaders at the time realized that many refugees in Africa weren't covered by the UN definition, which tended to focus more on individual persecution. So the treaty itself is still very important today, especially in African refugee law. Um, so we need to really we keep hearing this, and it's very important that South Africa signed a treaty, which is true. We've had this one many times. Even the new mainstream news will talk about it, but they don't explain to the public what are those treaty. They do say that South Africa signed this treaty, especially when South Africans say that it's enough now for refugees and asylum. South Africa should not take any more refugee or asylum. And the media would counteract and say, oh no, you've signed refugee, this treaty, and so on. So, yes, we must protect asylum seekers. As I said before, the only three that if you are a UN signature to UN Refugee of 1951 Convention, you must protect people who are fleeing persecution, must protect them. And so it does feel sometimes that South Africa is the only country that is carrying the refugee asylum burden in Africa, and South Africa is the least country that produces refugee asylum in Africa. So now, so these conventions, UN Refugee Convention of 1951, the 1967 protocol that removed European only restriction. There was also this another one, 1969, as I've spoke about, OAU Convention, which is really specific to Africa, specific causes like which may be war, colonial violence, and displacement. These treaties say if someone is fleeing war, torture, or political persecution, you can't just deport them. You must protect them until it's safe to go home. Okay? Post 1994, South Africa signed both the UN and OAU treaties. Of course, it wanted to clean up the apartheid image of inhumane that apartheid engaged in, to try and to demonstrate to the international community that they respect the rule of law. They are treating people with, provide them with safety and human rights. So, and then what they did, then they went extreme, no refugee camps. Refugees, often all of them live in poor community that were displaced during apartheid and are still displaced today. Big problem there. So it does really feels like South Africa is really the only country that's carrying this burden of African immigrants. Not just now, even not African immigrants now, they are Pakistani, they are Bangladesh, and there are a lot of Asian communities that are seeking refugee in South Africa. Now, it's not that South Africa is wrong for helping, it's that they're doing it without backup. While South African people, citizens, are still waiting for justice, meaning they're still waiting to have their homes, their land that were dispossessed during colonialization and apartheid. So, this is the big problem. Now, and also the other stuff is this unemployment. South Africa has the heart, but not the resources. Instead of blaming the poor, we should be asking, where is the African Union? Where are these countries? Where is the support? And why are smugglers, corrupt officials, and big businesses profiting from the suffering of both locals and migrants? So, yeah. So these treaties were designed to protect people fleeing war, persecution, or disaster. They say don't deport them, let them apply for asylum, and treat them with dignity. These are the 1951 UN Convention, Refugee UN Convention, and the 1967 Protocol and 1969 OAU Convention. So many African countries, they also signed this, but a few enforce them. Some, they like the camps, as we had with Zimbabweans that are putting people in prisons who are seeking asylum or refugee. They who are, yeah. Some really, they definitely deny asylum outright. They deny asylum outright. And I think Botswana also does that, doesn't? But Botswana is the safest country in Africa. And another thing that is also very much more different is that in South Africa, refugees, they live in the community. Those who are seeking asylum, they live in the communities. So if people have become refugees, it's actually different than asylum. So asylums, they live in a community. Refugees, they usually are citizens, or they treat them as citizens in most countries, including South Africa. The issue here is the asylum, because in asylum, someone that's coming in and claim to be facing a unfortunately persecution, but the authority at the time, they may not even have enough information about the circumstances of the person, especially if they walk into the border and you don't have the right time to investigate it, to look at the security risk and other stuff. So this is where the issue is with South Africa. So because we know that townships, usually these Khalesia, Alexander, all these, they actually carry a lot of refugee burden, a lot of load. Not the elites, those elites who often use these immigrants to work at low of no less than minimum wage. So they don't, they benefit from it, but the people who bear the burden are the most vulnerable people in the community in South Africa. So, and you also could see that even with these corrupt officials, the landlords, the so-called clever blacks that are called in South Africa, which would be the middle class black people who were living in these townships and suddenly got better and now moved out of townships. Now they bought a house in a suburb, and then they would then have rent these houses to these illegal immigrants, and then often exploit it, and with that bring about this problem in the very community of poor community in South Africa. This is the fact. Okay, and so you can also see that some of the employer that are exploiting them, especially in those informal um, employment like farmers, retail, like Uber driving. Yeah, they very much exploit these immigrants. Mostly, they are undocumented. Even though South Africa has asylum, so that people can get in and actually claim for asylum, they are not documented. So that means they have not claimed any asylum. They're just there being exploited. Even those who claim asylum, even those who find in the houses, that they found them in the houses there in South Africa, they usually do that and get them work underground, like in that shop in Tshwane. They would work there, and once they work and get in, and nobody would know who they are. They work there, and when they realize that they've been there for a while, they release them into the street, and then so that they can then go and claim asylum. Yeah. So there's a lot of that going on there as well. So you can see that really the system is very corrupt and people are really very much abusing it. And the officials, yeah, also they may take advantage of it. We've seen some videos of some of them in jail as a result of these bribes they're taking from these people. That is also a problem. So yeah. So the real question is then who else signed? We spoke about Uganda. They signed both the 1951 UN Convention and the 1969 OAU Convention. Uganda is actually also like South Africa do have a little bit smaller amount, be it smaller amount of refugees, about 1.85 as of May 2025. They do allow some movements. They do offer them some healthcare and work permits. Egypt is also a signature to both treaties, but it severely limits refugee rights. They don't have refugee rights. Yeah, so they don't. Kenya, similar, spoke about that they keep them in camps. And yeah, so in 2021, the government ordered closure, threatened mass return, citing strain and security concerns of these camps. Uh, it is a very problematic, this issue, because as you can see, even in Europe, a lot of these illegal immigrants from Europe are from Africa. Okay, and Zambia, they've rectified this convention with reservation. They limiting the work, education, residence rights for refugees. So if someone came into Zambia, they wouldn't be able to work. They wouldn't be able to go to any schools. They would also not become residents of Zambia. So they would be protected. But those other things like work, education are considered as additional measure because, like I said, is to the three things you must not do. You must not return them back. You must not. You must treat them with dignity. You must allow them to apply. Um, so Zimbabwe, they Zimbabwe signed this as well. Actually, it did sign. They did sign this. They signed this, but yeah, they're the highest countries that produce a lot of these problems, actually. But they signed this. They signed this UN convention, and they rectified in 1981. with reservation as well. There is no atomic work permits in Zimbabwe. There's limited education rights, can designate where refugees live, where they can do that, and that is while they've signed it. They've signed it with reservation. Okay. Same thing with Malawi. Malawi, same. They apply, so they apply in Malawi is first principle, first country of asylum. That means that if the country like Mozambique had this problem last time, they would then take Mozambique because it's close to them. Uh, yeah, it is a problem for Malawi. And as you see, that a lot of them, they now are become now a problem for South Africa as well. You see? Now you got Tanzania as well. Tanzania has a long history of hosting refugees. They have some policy restrictions, but generally they are, very lenient. But they really don't offer any details about it or how they manage refugees. And this is around SADC region that I'm looking at now. So with Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique, Lesotho, Eswatini, Angola, DRC, Mauritius, they all have signed, but there's limited data on how they implement these uh, convention. They all of them, we know that they rely on camps and also very much restricted policy. Yeah. So South Africa feels like it's carrying the load alone because neighboring countries either they implement with strict limitation or they don't settle refugees locally. Many keep them in camps or under tight restrictions. Where's the African Union and regional support? Despite being part of the SADC, Zambia, Zimbabwe heavily restrict refugee rights. Zambia and Zimbabwe. And these people, the only one you hear them saying that Africa has no borders, never was border in Africa. You've had that person from the few videos that I did a while, Zimbabwean human rights was saying Africa had no borders, but you could, and then talk about xenophobia. I mean, the biggest xenophobia is this one that South Africa doesn't actually restrict refugees, but in Zimbabwe they have a strict restriction on refugees, and they even keep them in prison. So Malawi applies asylum rules as well. They don't also do not offer even integration. So leaving South Africa isolated and bearing this brunt of refugee. And I say for the Minister of Home Affairs, you need to align this refugee stuff with the neighboring countries. So you don't have to actually be their choice for many of them. So be similar to others. So because, like I said, there are things you must do. Other stuff that our ANC has offered all these years that has led to this problem, it must end because they're not really a must. They're not obliged to do this stuff. They're not obliged to have these people opening spaza shop and working spaza shop. Not obliged to give them employment. Not obliged to, you can bring them basic stuff that are required, and you're also not obliged to settle them in the community. This is according to this convention. It is, you can rectify it and not offer those type of stuff because don't have any more fund, there's no money. Because now we can see also that people are profiting from it. Landlords are profiting from it. The employers are corrupt, officials are exploiting these migrants, and the people who are bearing the burden, like I said, are poor local black community in South Africa. So it's this stuff. It is a problem. It is a big problem, and when you look at here how people talk about it and in the news every day, it's shocking really to me that they've allowed this to continue.